Today we're going to be talking about our social impact program at Oculus, VR for Good.
Hi, I'm Amy. Lauren and I run the VR for Good program at Oculus. Wanted to just, before we even get started, get a little show of hands of how many of you have experienced VR before. Wow.
That's good.
That's a good number.
Good job. All of you, since you've been here, or are you all experts? Why are we doing this? Everybody knows about VR? So we're going to just take you guys through a few things about our program and get going with talking about our films and what we've done with the program so far.
Great. So let's kick this off with kind of introduction so you guys can meet all of our panelists, which is probably the real reason why you're here today, to hear from them. So if you want to, Heidi, kick it off.
Sure, I'm Heidi Natkin. I'm the marketing director at CARE and involved in helping us with our marketing strategy in terms of how to promote the film once it was released.
Okay.
Excellent. Hello, my name is Shannon Carroll, and I'm so excited to be here today and share this project with you all. And I see a lot of friends that I've made throughout the conference, so thanks for coming. And I run Vivid Story. We're a creative studio based in New York City, harnessing the power of visual storytelling for social enterprises and nonprofits. And we really specialize in emotional, personal storytelling. And mostly what we have done has been video production, and this is our first really big VR project, so we're really excited to be here.
Great. Hi, I'm Rob Holzer. I'm the founder and CEO of Matter Unlimited. We are a creative agency and brand consultancy based in the US, and we're focused on telling stories and doing brand strategy, but all around purpose-led work for different nonprofits and foundations as well as brands. And we've been working in the VR space for a few years now, and I have the fortune to have been a part of the Oculus for Good program as a mentor on this project. So I'm just on the ringside seat of this wonderful project that's going on.
And as I said, I'm Amy Seidenworm. I run VR for Good with Lauren. I came from the Los Angeles Philharmonic, where I ran the digital team there. I did a VR experience with Gustavo Dudamel when I was there, and that's how I got connected with Oculus. So I've sort of been deep in the nonprofit digital nerd side for a while, and then this was a great way to kind of merge those two worlds with this program.
Great. So since what is VR? A lot of you have already kind of experienced it. We don't really need to dive too deeply into that, but we just wanted to make sure to cover a few basics, understanding the technology and what this type of immersive media is all about. So just kind of kicking it off, virtual reality is powered by technology that allows you to be present in a simulated environment. Do you have the...
This is a Gear VR, which is a mobile VR device that Oculus makes with Samsung. We also make one that's a little bit more high-powered called the Oculus Rift, but this is a perfect demonstration device if you want to be bringing something around and traveling with it easily. I'm sure if you've all done VR, you probably had one of these on your head, but it's real easy and you look kind of silly looking around, but you also get to see a lot of stuff this way, be in a lot of environments.
Great. So what is VR for Good? We started this program at Oculus about 10 months ago, and our first major initiative was pairing 10 rising filmmakers with 10 nonprofits to really capture their stories of impact in VR, to allow them to share their story, to bring their donors, their stakeholders to where the work was being done. We brought all of the teams along with mentors like Rob to the Facebook campus, and over 2 days did kind of intensive learning around storytelling in VR, filmmaking, post-production. They were able to ideate on their story and start to kind of put together what it would look like. We gave them funding, access to tech, and post-production support. And then over the next 6 months, they really kind of blood, sweat, and tears, got in the trenches, and worked on their films.
There's a really wide range of films for the first class, and if you haven't, I welcome you all to please come and check them out afterwards. They range from a music education program in the inner city in Los Angeles. There's one about a really moving one about a woman talking to her father about the experience after he sold her into sex trafficking and their reconciliation. There's one about saving the reef in a small town in Mexico where the villagers actually decided to stop fishing so that they could save their environment. And then there's a beautiful one from CARE, which is called Women on the Move, and it's all about an ingenious microbanking solution that these women came up with in Africa. So I think the biggest purpose of this panel right now, rather than talk about how great our program is to really dig deep into this one project, let these guys talk about the process, and let you all ask questions if you're considering VR for your organizations, and let us help whenever way we can.
Great, so we have a kind of a quick 2-minute short behind the scenes video that will really kind of provide an overview of the program. We'll see if we can, I don't know if this is movable. Maybe? No.
If everybody could gather around really quick and then we can settle back in, I think it's worth watching.
Yeah.
I want to see this one. I'm gonna go with
We don't want to go in front of the speakers with these or we'll feedback. So as you can see, that was just the whole thing was just an excuse for Shannon to do a lot of dancing. Yeah.
I'm not going to recreate it here, but
Yeah, I don't know. Later, put a couple gin and tonics in her. Later, you may get her to do the dance.
So just to kind of kick it off, I'd love to. So this was. I'd love for you guys to talk about what brought you into this space. Shannon as kind of a new filmmaker working with 360 videos, Heidi with CARE, kind of looking at, from an organizational perspective, this new, what some people call experimental media. And Rob, you're kind of old hat doing this for 3 years now.
Yeah, old hat.
So I'd love if you guys could just talk about your involvement and kind of integration into the space.
Absolutely. So I'll start. I've always been really interested in how experiences and connection can really bring people together and to bring a sense of intimacy to these causes that are happening halfway across the world. And with my company that we basically exclusively work with social enterprises and nonprofits. And I just saw virtual reality as this incredible opportunity to really harness that connection and intimacy in an immersive way. And so I was just so excited when I heard about this program. And it's been a really incredible experience, creating this first project through this program.
So one of CARE's big challenges is that as an international development organization, we don't do work in the United States. We have an office there, offices there, but we work in the global South and to end global poverty and promote social justice with women and girls. And so, out of sight, out of mind to a lot of the donor population and advocate population. So, virtual reality offers us a really great opportunity to put potential supporters in places they will never ever go in their lifetime, and see people they will never, the types of people they will never interact with in their lifetime. And so, as a medium, it's something that that we wanted to explore to take us to the next level to connect with our supporters.
Yeah, so for me, I've been in digital for 20 years and used to have to tell people what the internet was back then. And I've been running an agency in the space more or less for about 15 years, and well, probably even more than that. And you see a lot of technology come along and you're like, okay, that's cool. And then you move along. I think I've had two moments in that 20-year span which were kind of holy shit moments. And the first was when I saw the World Wide Web for the first time, and it was Yahoo and it was blue lines, and I was like, oh my God, information whenever I want it. That's amazing. And that got me into the internet space and thinking about how that could impact the world, and I felt sort of the magnitude of it. And the second was really with VR. A production company, a friend of mine, came to me with an early demo of a director team called Felix and Paul, who a lot of people know now. But they were, out of Montreal, some music video director guys, and I put on the demo, which was, it was just this piece about a songwriter in his music studio in Montreal, and all of a sudden you put on the headset and you're there, sitting there in his studio, and you see him writing the music, and he's smoking a cigarette, and the cigarette's sort of coming out, and you look over to your left, and his dog's sitting there, and you look over to the window, and you hear the sound, and you're transported completely into his music studio, and they did the sound right as well, which I think is a big component to VR these days. And I was really astounded for the first time with technology in a very long time. And as soon as I took the headset off, I realized that this would be a tool that would be incredibly impactful for the kind of work that we do. And so, as Shannon was saying, we tell stories about organizations to people from across the world. Often those stories are wonky, and we try and make them compelling and cool and interesting for people to be spread. And at the time, we were working with the Clinton Global Initiative on a lot of work with the organization. So I had been going to CGI like Skoll, although this is my first time here, but and meeting with a lot of people in the organizations, learning about these amazing organizations that are doing work around the world. But outside the halls of CGI, people don't really quite understand it. And even inside the conference itself, what I noticed was a lot of conversation happening that was removed from sort of the emotional center, the heart place of the issues, beyond a lot of the passionate people that kind of ran the organizations. But the people who were making decisions on how to invest money, spend time, energy, whatever it was lacking a bit of that emotionality. So as soon as I took the headset off, I said, this is a great tool, and since we know CGI, let's go pitch them a story. And we created a film treatment for VR, and this is about 3 years ago. Went and we pitched it, and we said, maybe we'll get President Clinton interested, and didn't hear anything for 3 months, and then got a call somewhere around March a couple of years ago that it got in front of President Clinton, and he was interested in doing it, and we're going to Africa in 3 weeks, and could we make this happen? So we did, and we called up the folks at Oculus, who graciously offered to get involved. We said we can put the first president in VR, and they were interested. And then Felix and Paul turned out to be available, and we created this film, and President Clinton launched it at the Clinton Global Initiative annual meeting that year. And that was kind of right at that moment, I think, for VR, that it was having that zeitgeist moment. The New York Times had just put out 1 million cardboard headsets to their audience, and VR was kind of having its moment. And we had a moment there, which for me was, you know, having launched content into the world in different ways, it was an incredibly emotional, impactful moment. 3 days at CGI with lines and people coming up, everyone from Madeleine Albright, I get to put a headset on, to Dikembe Mutombo and Harrison Ford. I actually showed Han Solo VR for the first time. That was really cool. And you know, there was a seismic shift in seeing the faces of the people after they saw this film, and now having put the headset on thousands of people, knowing that we have something very different here that we've never been able to work with before. And we are literally in the tumbleweed days of this. It's so early. So the fact that we can do this now with this technology is incredibly exciting to me and to our team. And since doing that film, we've been working with a number of different organizations on creating VR films about telling stories from around the world and bringing their stakeholders closer to these issues. And this is only the beginning.
So one of the things I think that's really interesting is we're very early days, nascent industry. The production that goes into it, you talk about having to go like in 3 weeks to Africa. Shannon, you left our boot camp, and very kind of shortly after, it was a month later, you were going to Africa, and we're not bringing traditional film equipment through customs. We're bringing wonky looking cameras, things tech people haven't really seen before. What are some of those logistical challenges that you guys were facing? And if you could also touch upon like filming in another country and kind of working with your nonprofit partners, kind of the challenges there as well.
Absolutely. So should I talk a little bit about what our project was about and then go into the logistics of it?
Let's do a little deeper dive on the actual project and the video for those of you who haven't had a chance to see it in the studio inside.
Great, yeah. So our project that we made together was called Women on the Move, and it brought you to this small village in rural Niger. Niger is a place that it's one of the poorest countries on earth. It's often besieged by drought. Women have very difficult lives there. But 25 years ago, CARE initiated this program called Village Savings Loan Association, where it basically lets the women empower themselves. And it's this amazing microfinance program where the women are essentially enabled to loan money and like save interest over time. And what CARE really says about this program is that it's probably actually, even though it's a financial program, probably only about 20% of the benefit is really the financial part. But the really big part is the emotional bonding that these women have. And going from a place of fear and isolation in this very patriarchal society to one of community and trust building. And having to really depend on each other. And so then when a crisis happens, that they have people, these other women to count on. And so we really wanted to show that emotional benefit through this project. And so when we were at the boot camp, CARE works all around the world, 94 countries. And so we were thinking, okay, like, wow, we have like a world of possibilities here of like what kinds of stories we could tell for this particular VR project. And at the start of every single project, through my company, what we really always think about is, so who's your audience, and then what are your goals for that audience? And then we devise like the best narrative strategy to make that, audience, that goal come to life. And so for CARE, we really knew that, most of their donor base, especially based in the US, are really kind of these 35 to 55-year-old compassionate moms. And so we really wanted to create a story in VR that could really emotionally move, that kind of compassionate mother audience. And so we knew we had a very short time period because we wanted to get our project ready for Sundance in January, and the boot camp itself is in late July. So we're like, okay, we have to plan this now. The time's already, the clock's already ticking. And so we decided to go to Niger because they were just there about 2 months earlier with a photographer and videographer. And and I think as well, my background is actually in documentary filmmaking. And so I'm really interested in how, do you tell authentic stories? And the first thing that people often ask for, traditional type documentary proposal is access. It's like, where do you have access? And I think that was actually one of the brilliant parts of this program in terms of bringing us as filmmakers together with these nonprofits that had incredible access. And so we knew that in Niger that CARE had been working there for about 25 years. And so they had this amazing amount of trust built up so that so that we were able to actually just go in there. And it was kind of amazing how we were just really able to actually just think about the technology and the storytelling and have the CARE Niger country office help us out so immensely and bring us to that story that we can really tell on an intimate level. And as well with the amount of, and so I think that's actually, if you're a nonprofit and thinking about what kinds of stories that you can tell, think about where your access is and where the trust is. Because that's how you get to a real point of telling an authentic story with real vulnerability. And that's what's really going to connect with people. So on a logistic level, there was so much planning that went into, okay, so we have this $45,000 Ozo camera that we're going to go shoot with. And we got this amazing training directly from the Nokia people who made the camera, which was a huge benefit of this program. And so, we had to, do all this planning around getting the right kind of visas and everything. And so, there was tons of planning that went into that. But Lauren, on a logistical level, do you have any other specific questions? Are you more referring the process of getting there, or just actually being there and filming?
I think my mic, yeah. One of the things that I just wanted to be clear about is we also gave these guys a really unusual challenge, which is that we wanted them to make a great film, not necessarily a PSA for CARE. Mm-hmm. We wanted this content to be something that anybody would want to see, whether they were already interested or necessarily part of that demographic at all. We wanted these to stand alone as great stories. And I think ultimately that serves everybody really well, because if a film is having an impact at film festivals or virally online or something like that, then more and more people are hearing your story. And if they can see a micro version of what you're doing, then they can feel much more personally involved, I think, than if we're trying to touch on everything CARE does in a video. First of all, it would be 10 hours long, and it would be, I don't think it would be an emotional investment the way you're telling one small story of one village and one woman, and it's so much more powerful.
So that was a huge emphasis for us in going into this project and really scouting out, this is the one story that we're going to tell. And we actually had quite a challenge with it in terms of, the real change in this grandmother's life had happened many years ago when this program first started in Niger. So, oftentimes with especially a documentary style project, you often want to get the transformation as it's happening. And for us, the real transformation in the grandmother's life happened so many years ago, but she had this granddaughter who, the granddaughter didn't go through the same struggle and overcome the same challenges as the grandmother, but through that we gave ourselves a little bit of a difficult, to put this into a 6-minute project of how we kind of bring the visitor into this intimate experience between this grandmother and this granddaughter and really make you feel like you are a part of that relationship and tapping into that kind of maternal bond between the grandmother and the granddaughter. And because, like I said, who we really wanted to reach were, the compassionate moms, we really, because we knew who our target audience was, that's what we based the whole entire narrative around. And then also just to speak to the more practical aspects of the VR experience, which was, we really tried thinking about the camera not as a passive, inanimate object, but really as a person. And I think what really makes the virtual reality experience special is that it's a human-centered experience. And so what we like to think about the camera as is like an actual person, as a visitor. And so that we would generally try to set up the camera at a consistent height of 5'2", of being the average height for a woman. And we would try to get, the women in the village to actually look at the camera and engage with it. And it was just so fascinating because we really took an iterative process while creating the project. And as the director, you know, because this was the first big virtual reality project that we took on, it was really important for me to kind of set up this atmosphere in our filming within our crew to have kind of like a heart-centered leadership around that and a kind of growth mindset, and have every day be an iteration. And so we'd have check-ins throughout the day of like, okay, this worked, this didn't work. And we would watch the rushes at the end of every single day. And it was actually really fascinating. What we were finding was that so we found that, you know, when we were shooting and people weren't looking at the camera, you would actually, it was an incredibly alienating experience actually, because the camera's a person and you would just feel like you were ignored. So then we learned that, and then we were, you know, much more adamant about making people like make eye contact with the camera and pretending like it was a person. And yeah, and I think that that was a really important aspect of it for me as a director, to really create that environment. Yeah.
Did you have an easier time explaining that once you put the headset on the people you were working with and let them see kind of how the footage was coming through? I saw those pictures. Those are some of my favorite pictures of seeing these people in full, you know, tribal gear with the headset on who are obviously having a ball.
Yes. Yeah, so we had them also because we used the Nokia Ozo, which is the kind of camera where you actually have a monitoring station hooked up. So for every single shot that we did, it was a bit of a production in terms of that we would set up the camera and then we would have to remove ourselves from the scene because it's 360, of course. And we would set up the monitoring station behind a wall or, you know, out of sight, and we would be able to like watch it as it's happening. And so we would, yeah, and then later on, because we were there for 12 days total and our shoot was for 7 days. So we were there and we showed some of the villagers, actually some VR projects from New York City, and that was also kind of like a fun cross-cultural moment as well.
I think you're touching on kind of what you were learning on the ground. Rob, I think it'd be interesting if you could kind of talk about what you've seen in the different productions that you've worked on. Some of the things that we found is like a PSA format that a lot of nonprofits are tend to move to doesn't work in VR. So if you can kind of talk about maybe some things that you find really work in VR pieces and maybe some things that don't work when you put the headset on.
Well, I think you know, most organizations, even brand work, most brands will want to say everything they possibly can about the organization, about what they do in a piece, and you can't really do that. You can't do that in even a traditional piece of film, but in VR, you know, you have the opportunity to capture someone completely in this experience. It's kind of unique, you know, even here at a conference, you know, people checking their cell phones, or if you're watching a film on the web, you're doing your email, you don't have that ability. You're taking someone's time for a certain period of time in VR, so you have to give them a reason to be there. And to make it really compelling. So we're often thinking about, you know, what is it about being in this particular experience that would be compelling for someone? And often, you know, in early VR, and first of all, I'll say this, that everything at this stage is experimentation. There is no expert in VR. I am not an expert in VR. Most people are not, because what's happening is people are going out with this new technology and saying, maybe we'll try this. And then you see what someone else did, and that's really great, and you're like, oh, okay, let's do that. In my experience so far, and we've done a few of these shoots, getting big scenes is less impactful than finding this intimate moment. And intimacy in VR creates something very different, because intimacy creates presence, which makes you really fall into the scene and place yourself there instead of just being a fly on the wall watching something happening, which if you've seen different VR, and there's a ton of not so good VR out there, and you know, that's kind of like, oh, look at me, I'm here on a mountaintop, or something like that. But when you really get the emotional quality of it, it's where you suddenly are struck by the fact that you're actually feeling, your brain is tricking you into actually feeling like you're there. So we're always looking for those moments in the film, then I think where we've been the most successful have been capturing those moments. And it is hard to do in 360 because, you know, someone said this quote, it wasn't me, and I thought it was great, is that, you know, film is like a gun and you're shooting someone, but VR is kind of more like a bear trap where you're setting a trap out there and you're hoping something's going to happen. And so what you're doing is you're trying to set the circumstances that that magic happens. And we've gotten it a couple of times in very unexpected ways, which is great. And then in other ways, we're sure we're going to get it, and then it just doesn't happen. So you know, going for those moments of real intimacy and spontaneity where a viewer's really struck. I think one thing in a recent film we did with Merck for Mothers, which is a maternal health initiative that Merck does, we were in Uganda and filming in rural Kampala, and it's a story of midwives giving birth, and we have a birth on camera, which is, I don't know if it's the first birth in VR, but it's the first one I saw. And it's pretty impactful, you know, to see a woman giving birth, and in fact the way that a woman in Africa gives birth versus the way that you know, people in a hospital in the West would give birth was really impactful. And we've heard from people like, you know, you're there. And you know, making those decisions as a nonprofit of what you will or won't show as a creative, what you will or won't show also comes into play. But you know, you really want to go for those moments where you can capture something that gives somebody a rarefied, intimate experience.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point you kind of bring up as filmmakers. You're kind of deciding what to show, what not to show, working with nonprofit partners that are often dealing with human suffering, very sensitive topics. How do you kind of balance, like, what are the ethics that kind of balance the what some might consider as exploitation, whereas others might see as like you're providing kind of an insight, a view into the work that's being done?
Well, CARE has been very strict about how we work with women and girls, and we've always set a bar of portraying all of our program participants to the point that we don't ever call them beneficiaries, we call them participants, as dignified. So you will never see fly in your eye type of pictures, movies or stills, when CARE is portraying the work that we do. It's always about how we partner with them to help them have a better outcome in a very dignified way. And so that, I would imagine that came across as you were filming as well through the guidance that you received with our folks on the ground.
Absolutely, and I think that it was such a great match actually between myself as a filmmaker and CARE, because I really think it's, you know, everybody has dignity, and I think that to bring people into a story where they can really feel the respect and the dignity of these people that, you know, that they're watching, who live completely different lives than themselves. So yeah, I think that that is just exactly the way that we should be looking at this.
Yeah, no, ethics is a big part. I think even in any documentary filmmaking where you're capturing real life, there's those decisions to be made. But in VR, there's an added layer because you're putting somebody there. I think that VR leaves you a little bit more with something that's closer to a memory versus you know, watching something. Now, having put the headset on, you know, thousands of people, I've seen the reactions of people, and I hear often, I watch this film in VR, I hear, I was in Africa just now, or I experienced this thing. So I think it's a little bit of a shift, and so you have to think about what you want to put people into. But the surprising moments are great too. And you know, with the film with President Clinton and the Clinton Global Initiative, we were in Tanzania and we were in Kenya, and it was really important for me to have the last scene in the film, which is in Nairobi, which is, as many of you have been to Nairobi probably, it's a really modern city in many respects. There's you know, a modern downtown, and we did a scene we did Kibera, which was a beautiful shot in Kibera, but we also did a street corner in a busy modern part of Kenya, because we wanted to be sure that people understood that Africa is not this one-dimensional place, and it's dynamic and it's modern and there's things happening, and it's surprising for a lot of people for that. So you know, when we put the film online on Facebook 360, there were over 1 million views of the Facebook 360 video, which for me is great, because then you know that 1 million more people have a different perspective of what Africa is versus this one-dimensional view of it. And I think we have that opportunity with 360 video to give people that visceral experience, and you do have to be a bit careful with it.
Yeah, a lot of our filmmakers have struggled with that, and it's been a big question with our programs of which to support. And we've had an opportunity recently to make a project with people who are actually in a combat zone, and a lot of the footage would be very troubling probably to watch, and we're still trying to figure out whether that kind of thing will be something we really want to put people through, or if there needs to be a warning system or something, because if you saw someone live being wounded during an attempted rescue, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And I think there are ways to tell those stories without actually upsetting people. We want people coming out inspired and wanting to take action, not necessarily with PTSD or
Yeah. And I totally agree there, Amy. And I think that there's ways to kind of bring people through traumatic experiences where they get a deeper kind of understanding of what somebody else has gone through, but to leave them at a place where they can actually feel inspired, you know, and motivated to do something to improve that situation, and not to leave them like aghast or feeling like, wow, there's no hope and possibility in the world. And I think that's what we're really going for, you know, in the nonprofit storytelling space.
So talking about kind of that feeling, that call to action at the end, this is something we've spent a lot of time talking about. What is kind of like that next step? Why are you doing this in VR, and how are you bringing it to audiences, and what is the goal there? Is it to show 1,000, 10,000, 1 million people this story in VR? Is it to show it specifically to policymakers who are decision makers? One of like my favorite examples is Clouds Over Sidra. I don't know, is anybody familiar with Clouds Over Sidra? Okay, 2 or 3. Yeah. So this is a film that was produced by the UN and ahead of a fundraising conference in Kuwait for the Syrian refugee crisis. And this was about 2 years now ago, right? Mm-hmm. They showed this film that followed a day in the life of Sidra. And you went to school with her, you played with her and her friends, you were in her family's tent when they had a meal. And they showed this at a conference, and which was projected to raise like $2.5 billion, like billion. And they put the headset on folks after one of the keynote presentations, and they ended up raising $3.8 billion. There was a direct correlation for putting people into this experience and how that made them feel. They opened up their pockets. So one of the things that I'm kind of interested in is this idea of empathy to action, and how kind of CARE as an organization, you're thinking about using virtual reality in your kind of arsenal of advocacy and policy work.
So we're still pretty early days. Our film was released right at Sundance at the end of January, and then we were at South by Southwest in March, and now we're here. But yeah, so the Clouds Over Sidra model is something that we're extremely attuned to, and we are gearing up our fundraising team to be able to use the film in one-on-one conversations with major donors, corporate donors, foundations, because we do believe that the biggest impact will be in major gifts. That being said, we also think there are other opportunities, so we're just starting. And so one of them is with advocacy. How can our PAC, which is called CARE Action, how can they use that when they have their conversations with policymakers in Washington, D.C., in order to maybe influence some decisions around things like the foreign assistance budget? We're also looking at an event strategy. So once we're done going on tour with the Oculus team, you know, how else can we show it? Because it's not everybody has a headset right now, right? It's not ubiquitous yet, and so one of those opportunities is at events like this conference, like South by Southwest. But then in the future, we've set ourselves up with a booth, a viewing booth, to get folks immersed in the environment, and actually our booth looks like you're sitting in a hut.
It's fantastic.
It's so
cool.
cool.
Such a good job.
It's really fancy.
So yeah, so it's a
Yeah.
picture. It's a picture from
Yeah.
one of the huts in Niger. So anyway, so we do have like an actual setup, so we can go take it to other events and show it to people when we're in group opportunities. And then another final piece is more mass focused and a little bit more on the brand awareness side as well, because that's something that CARE as an organization struggles with too. And so how do we get younger folks to get interested and aware of CARE? One of the things that we can do is use Facebook 360, and it's not nearly as immersive an experience as putting on a headset is, but it's still, you know, you can take your tablet or your laptop and move it around and look around the room as well. And so we're about to come out with a Facebook 360 version that'll be published shortly. And in fact, we've actually made a second version. So you saw our making of video. It's just kind of a teaser to get people interested in seeing what are we doing. It's a 6-minute film, and as you probably all know, attention spans are short when you're on social media. And so we actually have, is it 1:30? How long is the?
It's about 3.5 minutes.
It's 3.5. So it's a half-length video, but it's set up to capture your attention like the moment you look at it, so you want to click in and play with it. And it's and we're actually going to test the 3-minute version versus the 6-minute version and see what our engagement is like, because this is all new for most organizations, so we're learning as we go as well.
Yeah, we were lucky enough, I'm sure you all know that Oculus is owned by Facebook, so Facebook came in and gave all the nonprofits a large amount of ad credits on Facebook to do this test with the 360 videos and kind of bring, if you don't have a headset, there are still billions of people who can watch these videos on Facebook now.
Yeah, I think, you know, thinking about VR content as one component in your ecosystem of marketing is really important, and developing real strategy ahead of time and thinking about audience is key. We do a lot of that thinking versus just, hey, let's go produce a piece of content. We work with the organizations we work with and actually, you know, set up a workshop and think about, okay, audience, what does it look like? On the Merck project, the Merck from Others project, we created a VR film in Uganda, but we also did a traditional film for distribution, and we created other types of content and are continuing to do that, because it's sometimes not just about that one piece of content, it's about how do you bring it all together. VR has a real value, I think, you know, in engaging direct one-on-one stakeholders for sure now. Facebook 360 is a different experience online, and you do have to produce, we're all learning that you do have to produce different kind of edits and content for the 360 version, but there you get scale and reach. So how do you start to play around with all of the mix of content, and then where in the world are you going with it? Who's your audience is really, really important. The Merck VR piece was really built for global policymakers. When they go to German parliament and try and convince them to spend on maternal health, they now have this really powerful tool. The film we did with Child Fund International was really about their major gift donors, and also street teams going out on the street and using Google Cardboard and getting people to sign up more. And there's already mounting evidence to show that that works and indexes higher on getting people to donate with the right VR experience. So it's experimentation for sure, and it's but really, you know, defining audience before you make an investment like this, and thinking about it within the context of the rest of your system is important.
I think one other thing to just think about if you are thinking about making a VR for an organization is it is it visually interesting?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the questions we've come up over and over again is this a good film? Is this a good way to reach people with my message, or is there a creative way to make it interesting? And is VR the right solution? And sometimes I think, like in the combat situation, we probably will determine that those people should make a 2D video because that's the easiest way to do it, rather than be trying to control a whole environment when you're in combat.
Yeah, and I really think that, you know, from my filmmaking background, what really differentiates for me VR versus regular filmmaking is the sense of presence.
Right.
And if that presence will add value to your story and make it come alive in a way that, you know, maybe just a regular film won't, like, then you should make a VR project about it.
Yeah.
And having that sense of intimacy is just so key.
Yeah, and you know, VR also, so we're talking about cinematic VR, which is right now you film with a static camera. We're working, and a lot of people are working on projects now that are for room scale VR, which is you walk around in a space and now you're really talking about movement. And there are companies like The Void and, you know, IMAX are coming out with theaters where you can have multiple people being really interactive in the space, and that's where things are really headed. And it's super exciting for storytelling because there you really get people engaged and immersed in a space, but it's a much more limited reach. But the good news is that all of these emerging platforms like Oculus, like IMAX, like Netflix, all these various, The Void, they are hungry for really good content. And in our discussion, since our wheelhouse is what your guys' wheelhouse is, you know, stories of impact, there's an appetite for that kind of content as counter-programming to Marvel's next superhero thing or Disney's next movie in VR. There is an opportunity to, if you can tell a really good story, make it really compelling and even maybe fun and entertaining, which hopefully it is, you have opportunity now with these platforms that are hungry for your kind of content.
Absolutely, and I want to also, you know, make the remark that this technology is still emerging. I mean, yes, you know, people have been making VR for about 3 years now, like Rob, but you know, that's
longer than that.
or longer. You know, and the real VR has been around for many, many years, but this is just, you know, the most recent resurgence of it. But the fact that the technology is changing so rapidly, and every 6 months there's a new camera, or really a new way of, you know, making the stories even more compelling experiences. You know, like I heard that really where this is going in terms of, you know, what's kind of like the next big trend in VR is the haptic controllers, where you actually have agency over the environment. And think about, like, wow, for, you know, social causes, for people to actually be able to see something happening and to have that kind of connection with somebody and get a response from them. And that kind of intimacy that will be created and have agency over that story, that's gonna be really incredible. And then also serial content as well.
Or just to be able to pick something up and move it in an environment, or make decisions within, you know, do I want to explore down this alleyway, or do I want to go into the kitchen and see what's going on in there, things like that. I mean, that's happening now, and it's going to just change rapidly.
Yeah.
We're just babies right now.
Yeah, and so I think that, you know, which is just really kind of incredible in terms of, from a creator perspective, how that really democratizes the field. Because, you know, we've just made this project, you know, using this particular kind of technology and platform, but in 6 months, you know, there might be even more opportunities out there.
Yeah.
So we're constantly kind of creating this new grammar of how do we tell experiential stories that are emotional and engaging. And actually, one of my favorite moments, just in my own VR journey, was a year ago, actually, when I was at the Columbia Journalism School, and I was helping to facilitate this immersive lab with the Magnum Foundation, which is, you know, a photography agency. And we had these, you know, people come in from, like, you know, Google News and then the New York Times, and it was who had, you know, just started working in VR. And it was this kind of amazing moment, you know, where we're like at the Columbia Journalism School, and, you know, we have these very reputable companies to tell us about what they're doing with VR. And they came in and they were just like, we have no idea what we're doing.
What should we do in VR? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just this moment, though, that, like, all the pretension just suddenly left the room. And then that just, like, left us open to say, okay, what can we do? And let's figure it out and create it together. So.
How are we doing with time? I want to
Yeah,
make
it's
sure
just-
that we take questions.
We've been talking about kind of for 45 minutes, and we can continue to ask them a ton of questions, but I want to make sure, like, if you guys have any questions, things that you're particularly interested in learning more about, or Phil?
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about editing and post? You know, it's such a tool in a regular film, and we use it all the time to sort of cut through stuff that's here. You know, it's sort of like you're having to sort of let the shot evolve. I don't know, you've not really cut too much.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that in relationship to our project, Women on the Move. And so that goes back to our conversation about what really works in a headset versus what works online, you know, as just a 360 video in your feed. And in the headset experience, that the pacing is very slow. And you want to make people very comfortable in these environments that you're bringing them into. And once again, don't think about them as just a viewer, but like as a visitor. And how do you kind of introduce somebody into a space where they can feel a sense of security and be able to like look around. And that's where actually the real tension comes in with the story aspect, because yeah, there's this tension between kind of moving the narrative forward, but also giving people enough time to like look around and like feel like they're really part of the experience. And so for the 360 version that we made that's going to be promoted on Facebook, we had it so the cuts are much quicker, and so it's really engaging to somebody, and will be a thumb stopper on their feed. That's a phrase that we learned at the boot camp. And so yeah, it's a totally different, in terms of the pacing, it's much slower, and you really want to get people to pay attention to the narrative as it's happening in a 360 field, and you can use certain cues like sound and movement to direct people's vision in the 360 cinematic space, but it's much slower.
Were you wanting to know about the technical aspects, or is that pretty much what
No,
you're...
yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, same with you guys. There's just like so much that sort of it feels like a very different filming experience.
It is a very different
Like
production
the
experience.
shift that you mentioned,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Actually, I haven't thought about it that way.
And I think also some of these rules are being made and then they're being broken. So, which is great. You know, like moving a camera at the beginning would make people nauseous to the point of throwing up. Now people have figured out how to make movement feel good or feel okay sometimes. And,
Depending on the person.
but we're trying stuff. So like we had a motorcycle shot in India on a film project, and we're like, let's try that. And we put we had a rig on a helmet, and a motorcycle rode next to our characters, and I'm like, there's no way this is gonna work. And came back, and you know, they worked the stabilization in post, and it actually did work. So I think everyone's kind of trying things. You don't have all the tricks. You don't have close-ups and wide shots and all these kinds of things that you can do. But more and more, when I start to see some things that people are doing that are innovative and that actually work, you're like, huh, okay, let's put that in the pocket.
It's interesting. The playbook really is still being written for VR filmmaking, and I mean, we were talking about this today. We're like at the stage of VR filmmaking where it's like back early days film where the train is rushing in and people are in the audience, they're jumping out of the way. But it's you can go and you can watch different films, and it's amazing because you can start to pick out different pieces from them and say, this really worked in this film, or the way they put the camera in this film.
I wish they hadn't done it like that.
Yeah, so it's kind of, you can start to take bits and pieces of the content that we're seeing and kind of develop a technique playbook. So
yeah, I mean the other thing is just, we are so early that we keep thinking we have best practices, and then somebody blows them out of the water. Yeah, and we think, oh, never have a camera in the shot, and then it's like, oh, who cares? The camera's in the shot. Yeah. Please,
Yeah. Why even call it film? You know, it just film suggests a certain vernacular, a certain language, going back to the train in the dark room and people jumping in. You know, and a language was developed over time that became what we know as film. You know, there's a syntax to it, and close-up master shots over 2 shots, etc.
Or even just start and
finish. This is a form of immersive visual storytelling, but it's not film.
Yeah.
So I think it confuses people because you're going in thinking, when you hear that word, you think a certain experience, but you're not going to have that at all. It's something else. So I'm just wondering why we're even using that word.
Yeah,
We probably shouldn't.
probably agree with you.
I totally agree. Yeah.
I mean, I would just completely challenge
I-
every filmmaker here to like think of it differently, because a new language does have to be invented, and it's not even there yet. You know.
I
So-
totally agree, and I
Yeah.
always refer to our project as an experience
Yeah.
because that's what it really is.
Yeah.
And like Rob was mentioning before, it's like it's a memory building, experiential, narrative kind of storytelling, and then not thinking about the person as, like I said, like a viewer, but thinking about them as a visitor, and really changing that lexicon that we prescribe to how we create these projects, and thus
Yeah.
being able to look at it from a totally different point of view.
I think it would just liberate the whole process.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think that theater is going to actually play a much bigger
Oh, yeah.
role in this than film will, because the,
Yep.
the kind of immersive experiences that you're talking about are going to be draw more on the language of live performance
Yeah.
than it will on the language of film.
Yeah, and that's what's happening on these interactive stages that are being built out right now. 150,000 square foot stages
Yeah.
just released in Dubai, and you know, the interesting thing on these stages that we're working with is that this particular setup with the Void is remote, so
I've
you're not.
seen the Void.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not tied in anymore to the computer, and you're wearing haptic
Yeah.
information that's giving you feelings. And then they do things with sensory smell, picking up things, and there's a way to trick people into thinking they're walking straight in VR, but they're actually walking in a circle. So you can have
Yeah.
people walking endlessly
Right.
in an environment,
Yeah.
but they're actually walking around in a circle.
Yeah.
And so you know, when I think of Sleep No More and all these
was just gonna
great
say Sleep No More is cool.
immersive experiences, we're thinking about that stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people in the VR space take a lot of inspiration from the immersive storytelling.
Yeah.
Theater, even more so, I think, than actually regular film.
Yeah, we actually have seen it's a lot easier for someone who's maybe directed kind of that immersive theater
Yeah.
kind of space to come in and start filming in
Yeah.
360 video than someone who's just been used to framing
Yeah.
this
Well, they're not.
for their
they're
career.
not sort of married to
Right.
that.
They're not
language.
doing this.
Yeah, and by the way, there's
Filmmakers have
Yeah.
a much harder time with this than theater makers.
there's also you know, the piece that we haven't talked much about is the connectivity that's coming and interaction between people, and so you know, people can talk inside this environment. People can speak to each other inside this environment. You can have someone here, and you can have someone in Brazil, and they could be in the same environment. So what are we going to do, and how are we going to think about these things when we can do that with people's interconnection, as well as real-time data? You know, there's projects going on right now with real-time feed of data, which will affect and manipulate a story, not a film, but a story and experience that can change. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
It's very exciting work, so congratulations to all of you. And I almost hate to ask, but it also sounds very expensive work, not for profits.
All free.
Yeah, can you give us a ballpark though for expectations around what a 6-minute experience costs and things like this?
These actually were done pretty much on the cheap. I mean, I think we gave all the filmmakers $40,000, and then we also provided in-kind post-production services. So Oculus covered that side of things, and Nokia lent us cameras and trained them on those. But they also were meant to really be very moving and not necessarily technically mind-blowing on, you know, using every trick in the book. Our next kind of iteration of the program, we may spend more money on certain projects if they want to have an interactivity element or have a more ambitious goal. But you can do it. I would say if you have $100,000, you could probably make something.
And I know we had this discussion yesterday at lunch, but
Are you gonna
that
fight?
doesn't take into, I'm going to fight with you. That doesn't take into account all of the staff time. And so we're looking at what does it take for CARE to do the next film in a way we'd like to do it, and if we want to go get underwritten by you know, a partner corporation or something. And we think it's going to cost closer to $750,000 to $1 million. And that's, again, and we, CARE, has our own in-house videographer. In fact, we have 2. So most nonprofits don't have that. We don't have that luxury. We have, you know, a marketing team. We have a digital marketing team. So if you don't have that in-house, you're going to have to pay for somebody to do that. And so we're thinking about what is the cost of our internal labor when we're trying to sell it out. And that's why it adds up to more. Plus, it's not just all of the production and the time and the travel. It's also the marketing piece that goes on to support it. So, you know, add in the
Right.
all of the donation that we got from Facebook for our online promotion. Add in the cost of our booth if we want to take it on a tour. How much does that cost? All
I
the
mean,
post-process.
your marketing efforts are going to vary, and I
Yeah.
totally agree that I actually wouldn't just make a film and not have a plan around
Yeah.
it for marketing and distribution, and whether you want multiple cuts and a behind-the-scenes video and all those things, and those add up pretty
I
quickly.
think it goes back to that audience as well.
Yes.
Like, what's your audience? What's your ROI, your success metrics for doing a project like this, which is really important to think
I
about.
mean, you look at like the UN, the UN VR experiences. I mean, that I think cost a couple $100,000, Clouds Over Seja. Was that investment worth that for them? Yes. I
Yes.
mean, they.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
but they put in
$billions,
they put in a
but-
lot of man hours against showing the film
Yeah.
and showcasing it, and I'm sure PR and things like that. So, you know, none of these things do very well
Yeah.
if you just drop them, into
Needs
the
to be
Oculus
a
store and
plan.
don't actually market them. So, and that's when I was in the LA Philharmonic, and we created a whole truck that we toured around the city. It was called Van Beethoven, and we showed these to communities that were underserved by the arts, and that was our goal. It wasn't necessarily a fundraising initiative. It was to get arts out into the community, and that cost a bunch of money to outfit a truck. But our funders were excited about it.
I'm wondering if you all have thought about, or if you're familiar with thinking about the difference between VR for fiction and nonfiction. Because I haven't watched all of the projects yet, but all the projects I've watched so far are driven largely by narration, right? So, there's narration in fiction storytelling for sure, but much less so. And going back to some of these issues you're raising about the tensions in storytelling as within this format, right? I worked on a fiction VR shoot, but I think there's not a lot of that.
Yeah, because it's hard.
It's
It's really hard. It's hard to get actors to know what to do in VR. I've seen, there's stuff coming out now, like just now, that I think finally kind of shows where it's going. We're thinking about scripted stuff for sure, but I think even in a rendered environment, that's a like computer generated graphic environment, you have a better chance at that right now. There's going to be a filmmaker who's going to kill it. That's the bottom line. It's gonna happen. It's happening. It could be you, it could be anybody, and that kind of goes to the other question of cost. Like, I think that there's going to be some kid, I say kid, I don't know, some girl somewhere that's going to take the Samsung VR handheld consumer $200 camera and make something incredible, and that's not going to cost them anything except their sweat and tears. And then we do shoots at millions of dollars, right? But that's always going to exist. It's just like regular filmmaking right now. You have your Spielberg movies, and you have, your crazy breakout successes out of Sundance. So I think scripted is coming, and people are going to do a great job on scripted. It's a whole new language. It's a whole new way of thinking about it. So it's going to take some experimentation.
And then some advice for just organizations who have lower budgets is to get a camera that stitches itself, because so much of the cost is in the post-production and stitching, the 8 camera angles together. So that's just one way to lower that cost level.
Hi.
I have a kind of hybrid question to combine those two things, because when you said $40,000 and on the cheap, for a lot of the organizations that I represent, that's a crazy amount of money. That would represent like 10 full-time salaries for a lot of our social enterprise organizations. I'm in Asia, right? And that you were talking about, the young person who's going to do it. And so I know the technology well enough to know what the physical hardware costs, and the costs are coming down rapidly. And so so I teach at the University of Hong Kong, and a lot of what I do is just throwing students at problems, and then whatever business models stick, we run with it. So my question is to you two, VR for good from an impact standpoint, the earlier stage intervention with smaller amounts of money can reap much larger impact overall. So is there any tools or plans or anything in the pipeline to help that student who wants to make a movie for a very local organization? And no offense, but the organizations you're helping are the ones that need it the least. in a lot of sense, because they already have videographers and whatnot. So like, is there a way to connect with the people that maybe are lower to the ground?
Yeah, well, so we started actually like thinking about that model in high school education. We have a program, the High School 360 Challenge. We started kind of a beta program first, and we were going in and providing tech, like the Gear VR phones, and then like a Ricoh Theta camera or a Samsung 360 camera, which are all cameras that are relatively inexpensive. They're nowhere near like a $45,000 Ozu or a massive like self-produced $60,000 rig that some filmmakers are using. So the actual tech cost is low, and we're seeing incredible stories. So our first program, we worked with 9 different schools in the Bay Area, and we saw incredible short videos coming out of students. So I definitely think that there is a model there, and that's where I'm really interested in seeing, to your point, like what these kind of like millennial creators are going to start doing as the technology, the cost of entry continues to drop, because the crazy stuff that we see on YouTube and stuff like that, we're just going to start seeing it in 360. Yeah. So it's one of the things that Amy and I are definitely thinking about, how like the expansion and how we can not only produce films like you're seeing in here, but also kind of broaden the access with either tech loaner programs or whatnot.
And how to find something in between.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people who are potential funders are used to watching HD and see even what we present as being, lo-fi comparatively. So how can you kind of bridge that gap so that they don't think something is poorly made? There are a lot of tools coming out, just like when videos really started going mainstream, that are free tools, and Facebook has a really good edit tool that you can use for free for stitching. And if you have a self-stitching camera, and it's a question of time versus money, really. If you have time and you have the effort, I think almost anybody can make something really impactful right now. Yeah. We are starting to put together a list of best practices and hopefully have a resource so we can say, you want to make a VR film, here are free resources for you, and here are a list of things you should consider before you jump in.
And a lot of it, there's a lot of educational resources out there right now. Like Facebook 360 has an incredible page that actually lists out really like best practices as kind of like as they're evolving, but there's incredible community groups. Like I know there's a Facebook group that for 360 filmmakers that has like over 50,000 members, and it's people who are showcasing their work, they're asking questions, they're having meetups, they're asking for feedback, and it's an incredibly like organic thing that's happened where people are just kind of learning the space together. So we're seeing a lot of people really kind of come out of that with kind of increasing their.
Yeah, and we're based, Lauren's based at Facebook, and Facebook built this technology, and the people, I had a question about posting one of our videos, and the people were at a conference, and I just posted on the page and got 100 responses in about 10 minutes of all sorts of people who had already had the same issue, and were happy to be part of that community and share. And it's an incredible world right now. I feel like everybody's really excited to explore and be supportive of one another.
Mm-hmm. I think we probably have time for one more question since it's almost 1. But go ahead.
It's more kind of a comment. We've been experimenting with the very cheap Samsung 360.
Yeah.
I work in Ethiopian in community development and education. I usually take it with me. And the first time I did it, it was terrible. It's like, I couldn't see anything. But then I did have someone help me edit it, so I think that was very helpful. But I took it into our school and left it on a tripod in the middle of the classroom and just kind of had the kids do very simple, and it was very inexpensive for us to kind of work on it. And now we're really thinking of actually taking a team with us and doing it with in a very inexpensive way. So I think there's definitely a way to make it happen in a much smaller budget.
And the camera you're mentioning, the Samsung one, I personally have that one. That I take that when I travel, and I personally find it shoots above its weight. It's a really great kind of consumer.
Yeah, we use it as a camera on shoot. It makes its way into edits.
How much is it? Just for
I think it's
$200.
$200.
And it auto stitches straight into the phone, and you upload it to Facebook. It's just a great, elegant, early solution for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have time?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, and this is also kind of more of a comment, so I'm not throwing another question out there. So I work for the UN Foundation, and we're kind of just in this mix. We've just put out our first film, which is about malaria prevention. It's called Under the Net.
It's great.
It just won an award. It's doing pretty well. We learned a lot from the work that you talked about that the UN did with Alexander Sidra, as well as Waves of Grace. If you haven't seen them, they're both.
Oh my God, My Mother's Wing.
They're phenomenal.
Yeah.
They both make you cry in really good ways. But I would just add a couple of comments that for me are just interesting because I've had a chance to work with this a little bit. The part of the cost, and I know you all said this as you're saying, think about the marketing, the distribution, in the staff time, but it's also, I want to add into that marketing and distribution is engagement. So when you're showing people, there's an expensive cost. We took the VR film, the UN ones, Alexander Sidra and Waves of Grace, to South by Southwest last year, and to South by Eco, and it's totally worth it because you have lines of people out the door who want to see it, and they're all telling each other. But at every single showing, you have to be standing there, and every single showing takes 8 minutes or 6 minutes or whatever it is, and it takes a couple of minutes to get it set up and to tell people how it goes, and then when people take it off, they want to talk to you, which is great. It's again makes it totally worth it, but you got to talk to them for 5 minutes, and you really wish you could talk to them for 25 minutes, and you're trying to get the next person set up. So you have to build that into your thinking, and it takes significant time in a way that's really valuable, but you don't build it into your thinking for any other engagement that you're doing, because when you put something on YouTube, you don't have to talk to somebody for 20 minutes. You wish you could.
Right. But it's an opportunity too.
It's a total opportunity. And then I would just, one last quick thought is Gabo Aurora, the guy who produced those films, there's a thought that sticks in my head that I've heard him say a couple of times, which is he thinks that the reason he pushed the UN to do it, he remembers when, I think it was Atari that he talked about, one of the video game systems when he was a kid, and how no matter how bad the game was, it was the game that was available and everyone wanted to do it. And he said, what if we, as this world is burgeoning, there are brands that are starting to move into it, what if we could flood that zone with all, what if we could have, when Atari came out, he could have put all cause-based material in it. And he could have engaged an entire generation of kids in doing good. And there is that opportunity now. I know it's expensive, it takes time, but if we could all rush into that zone with good stuff, people are going to go to the good content.
Well, if we could have good stuff and have diverse filmmakers or whatever you want to call them, so that we can control who the voices are early before before it's such an established field, I think that's really important to us too.
The opportunities for...
So it's not VR for bad.
There's plenty of that. There's plenty of that.
To his point, it's good VR for good. Like you're actually having a good experience, and it's good content.
And I really think that this kind of immersive storytelling is needed more than ever. We're in one of the world's worst humanitarian crises right now. The resources on our planet are shrinking. Like, the more that we can get people to intimately feel like they are a part of something larger than themselves and encourage them to take action and feel true human connection in that way, like, wow, what incredible opportunity.
So I think we're pretty much out of time, but I know Amy and I
we'll hang out. We're happy to talk to you. Just without microphones.
And if you haven't had a chance to go in and see any of the films, you should totally check them out. Gabo was actually a mentor.
He was a mentor.
Notes to My Father. You should check it out.